Hello, my name is Tim Shoebridge and welcome to this, which is the latest video in my little mini-series about the Waldorf Quantum. Now in this particular video, I'm not going to be looking at something new on the synth. What I'm going to try and do is something really quite foolish, which is to try and match the sounds of the Quantum, which is a predominantly digital synthesizer, against a predominantly analog synthesizer, and I've chosen the sequential Prophet 6 for this particular test. Now I say it's foolish, it is foolish because I've tried it before and it is impossible to exactly match a sound of one synthesizer against another one. However, the reason why I want to do this is I just want to sort of like see for myself, as much as anything, how well the Quantum can replicate or come close to the analog kind of warm sounds that you'd get from a synthesizer like the Prophet 6. So that's what's coming up in this video. I really hope you enjoy it. Thanks very, very much for watching. Okay, let the madness begin. Alright, so here I have got the Prophet 6 and I've got a very, very, very simple patch on it. Really, really very simple. I've got both oscillators playing a sawtooth. And then I've got a low pass filter. It's set to around sort of like 11 o'clock in terms of the cutoff, and pretty similar in terms of the resonance as well. And I'm just controlling the low pass filter with an envelope. I've got a long attack. It's around kind of 2 o'clock in terms of the dial here. So just a long sweeping attack opening up the filter, and it sounds like this. Very, very simple, and even with a really, really simple patch like this, it is impossible to match it against another synthesizer, let alone if you get more complicated. So that's it, really, really simple. I'm not spreading, there's a pan spread option on the Prophet 6 to sort of spread the voices across the stereo field. I've got that off at the moment, and I have got no effects either. So it is a pure analog signal path, really simple, monophonic. Right, so in terms of a patch on the Quantum to match the Prophet 6, my first attempt is to try and match it quite closely in terms of oscillators, waveforms, etc. And what I've got here are two oscillators in use, 1 and 2. They're both playing a sawtooth, same as the Prophet 6 is, and I'm routing those oscillators through the analog filter. There are two analog filters on the Quantum. I'm just going to use one of them in sort of standard low pass mode, and I am sweeping that filter as closely as I can with an envelope, and it sounds like this. So the same as on the Prophet 6, I'm not using any effects at all. Compression is completely off, no EQ, nothing. It's just as it is, straight out of the synth. And in terms of stereo, well, I'm going through the analog filter, and that makes the signal mono effectively. So in terms of sort of like the stereo spread and in terms of effects, it matches the Prophet 6. So to try and make it a little bit more of a real sort of like a scenario, I'm just going to play a set of chords, and I'm going to play just a little sort of gentle drum track in the background, and then I will switch between the sound of the Quantum versus the sound of the Prophet 6, just so you can get a sort of like a closer comparison between how they sound, and I'll do that now. Okay, so as you can hear there, they're not the same. They're certainly not the same, but they're not supposed to be the same, or I won't ever be able to make them the same, put it that way. But they're not completely dissimilar either. They're quite similar sounds, quite sort of like similar feels, sort of like in a mix of a song. I think the Quantum does fine. It's not a Prophet 6, but it sounds fine. It's got that kind of vibe to it. But they're very, very different synthesizers, and I was kind of hoping, to be honest with you, with all of the sort of like the digital control that you've got over the Quantum, I was kind of hoping that I could get it quite close, but the reality is I can't. The two things that I found the most dissimilar or most difficult to match certainly was the filter to start off with. Now, in terms of the filters on the Quantum, I haven't done a video sort of like going through them at all, but in terms of the analog filters, you've got a choice. We've got a type here. I don't know if you're going to be able to see on the screen. It's not a close-up of the screen, but we've got 12 dB 2-pole and 24 dB 4-pole options, and we've got just regular filter. Then we've got one with a saturation and one called dirty, and both of those other ones are really sort of like just additional amounts of drive going into the filter. And what I find is that they really emphasize the bottom end, which lots of people want and like, but it didn't help me get close to the Prophet 6 by choosing the saturated or the dirty filter options, because actually there's actually not a lot of bottom end on the Prophet 6, I have to say. Not that it's a bad thing, it sounds wonderful, but it's not really sort of deep and beefy, and you can make the Quantum really quite deep and beefy with these filter options. Now, you might be able to see here on the screen, but I actually ended up with going with the 12 dB filter as opposed to the 24 dB filter, because what I'm finding is that the Prophet 6's filter is kind of sitting somewhere in between those two, in terms of the way that they've been implemented in the Quantum. The 24 dB was just too drastic a cutoff, and trying to get that sort of slow sweep. It's partly the issue is the envelopes don't match, and the sort of like the exponential kind of linear curves don't match. But I actually found that I could get closer to the sound using the 12 dB filter than I could using the 24 dB filter. So I've ended up going with a 12 dB filter here, and in terms of the envelopes, just could not get that sweep to match. Closer was linear than exponential. From what I can hear on the Prophet 6, the attack is kind of exponential, but it's a really sort of gentle curve. And with the Quantum, you can change that to be exponential, but it's really, and you can see from the graph, it's quite a sort of a drastic, strong, it's a strong exponential curve. And really what I'd need in order to match the Prophet 6 is a gentle exponential curve, and I couldn't find a way. I don't think there is a way with the version of the firmware that I'm running here. There's not a way to actually adjust that exponential curve. So you've either got a strong exponential curve or you've got linear, and I wanted somewhere in between. So what I ended up doing was using two filter envelopes to control the filter. I've got this one, which is the long sort of linear sweep. The sweep's about 2.5 seconds, the attack here, and then I actually overlaid that with the second filter, and I've got this really quite strong, quick, it's a decay, but then I'm using it negatively, so I'm negatively applying it to the filter. So I'm just sort of like really sort of like just scooping out and giving a little sort of quick exponential, if you like, flick to the bottom as soon as you hit the keys, to try and simulate to a degree, as much as I could, the filter and the envelope effect on the Prophet 6. So those are the sort of things that I ended up doing to try and get the sound close. Now obviously we're dealing here with quite sort of mundane monophonic sounds, which absolutely are fine when you're building up a track and it's not the only sound. You know, it's quite rare that you really want big wide stereo sounds, but in these kind of tests, I appreciate for you watching this video and listening to it, it would be nice to have some stereo going on in there. And as soon as you add some stereo, so I add some pan spread to the Prophet 6, that's when things start to really diverge in terms of the sound between the Quantum and the Prophet 6. So I'll cover that next. Okay, so in terms of adding some stereo width to the sound on the Prophet 6, we can add stereo effects, which we'll come to eventually. But before we get to stereo effects, we can use this control here called the pan spread control. And what this control does is it spreads the voices. We're not talking about unison mode and spreading voices in unison mode. We're talking about just purely placing voices as you play notes, either in the left channel or the right channel, and how much of left or right is controlled by this control here. So if I turn it up to maximum and I just play one note and I just keep pressing the key on that one note, you'll hear it's right channel, left channel, right channel, left channel. So there's an algorithm in there as to where to place the sound in the stereo field. Obviously it's trying to keep it sound balanced, not keep putting it in the left and not keep putting it in the right. And obviously that algorithm is complex when it comes to holding down multiple keys, so that the whole effect sounds good and we don't keep hearing the same notes all the time in the same channel. Now this is something that the Quantum doesn't do at the voice level unless you're stacking in unison mode, which we're not doing here. I can't just simply turn up a control and start hearing notes pinging left and right. It just doesn't do that. The stereo capability is there. It's there in quite a few of the functionalities inside the synthesizer, but this sort of behavior of pinging voices only left or only right as you're playing is not something that the Quantum does. So as soon as we start to add some stereo capability here in the Prophet 6, I've suddenly got a difficulty in trying to replicate that sound. Now what I've ended up doing to create some stereo here, well, the first thing I really need to do is to not use the analog filter anymore. And that's a sort of a topic of discussion for another video, I have to say, when I talk about the filters. But the analog filters are monophonic in nature, they're not stereo. So what I've done is I've created another preset which is using the digital filter, the digital former as it's called. And the digital former is a stereo filter. So it means that I can create some width in terms of how I sort of set up my oscillator. I can feed it through the filter, and that width gets maintained when you hear the sound. So this is obviously not going to sound like the other Quantum patch, because the other Quantum patch was using an analog filter and this one is using a digital filter, but it sounds like this. Now, as you'll see from the front panel here, I'm actually only using one oscillator, not two. And that's because I can actually create stereo width, as I sort of described in my previous video. I can create stereo width by playing multiple waveforms within a single oscillator. And that's what I'm doing here. I've actually got 3.1 kernels in use on this oscillator. So that's sort of a little bit more than 3 waveforms. And I have got them slightly detuned, which is the way that it's working on the Prophet 6. But I've got the stereo field set to 140 degrees, so they're panned quite wide. And so this is giving me that stereo feel, but they're panning each time I press a note. Even if I press one note, they're still being panned. There's not this sort of switch from one to the other. You're not hearing one note, one frequency only in one channel, which is what you're doing with the Prophet 6. So because of that, there are going to be differences in the sound. So what I'll do now is just play that little drum track that I had before, and these two stereo now presets, Prophet 6 and Quantum, and switch between them so you can hear the difference. So I don't know what you think, but to me, to my ears, the Quantum in stereo mode, if you like, the sound is sounding fuller and richer than the Prophet 6. It's actually got more bass to it as well. And I don't mean that in a sort of like derogatory way as far as the Prophet 6 is concerned, but it does sound slightly thinner. There is a little bit, tiny bit less bass. And I think that the reason for that is because when you've got the pan spread up full on the Prophet 6 and I hold down, say, an E flat, then you're only ever hearing that E flat either in your right ear or your left ear. You're never hearing it in both. Obviously, it changes as I'm playing as to which channel it's in, but it's only in one. Whereas with the Quantum, you're hearing that E flat in both ears. There's a nice, lovely sort of like stereo effect going on with the Quantum, but it's different. It's differently implemented to the Prophet 6. And I think what that does with the Prophet 6 is it gives some sort of space around the notes. It does sound sort of a little bit more delicate and a little bit more raw, and you kind of hear more of the sort of like the real sort of sound of the oscillators than you do with the Quantum. And as I said, there's not a bad thing. It's not a derogatory thing with either of the synthesizers. It's sort of like horses for courses at the end of the day. There are going to be times when you really want a big, fat, thick sound, and the Quantum can really deliver it in stereo mode. And the Prophet 6 is giving you in the stereo mode a little bit more sort of like intimacy and delicacy. So that's really what I wanted to cover in terms of stereo. I was thinking about going and looking at the effects as well, but to be honest with you, the differences in the sound, or they're going to diverge even further as we start to add effects, because I'm not going to be able to get exactly the same reverb as I can on the Prophet 6, and I'm not going to be able to mimic exactly the same the chorus as well. So I'm not going to go there with that. But what I thought I would do is just sort of like finish off this video just talking a little bit about sort of like, just generally speaking, emulating analog synthesizers with sort of like digital oscillators, etc. The qualities that we really love about analog synthesizers, and I'm going back to vintage analog synthesizers, is we really love, well, two qualities. Firstly, sort of like the sort of the overdrive capabilities of a synthesizer, being able to really push the audio into the filter circuit, for example, or the amplifier circuit, and get some sort of like lovely warm sort of like semi-distorted overtones. Those things, we really we rely on emulation software inside digital synthesizers and effects to be able to sort of emulate those kind of sounds. But more than the sort of the drive, what really makes an analog synthesizer sound so analog is the sort of the unpredictability that's going on inside the circuitry. No two oscillators, voltage controlled oscillators, are really going to be giving you the same sound at any point in time or ever. And the same goes for the LFOs, which are basically voltage controlled oscillators as well. The same goes for the envelope generators and the filter circuitry. There's a reason why one vintage Moog Model D sounds different to the next, because there is this sort of unpredictability and slight differences between the circuitry at any point in time due to the weather and the humidity, etc., let alone the actual components themselves. And it's weird because we're so into analog at the moment, but modern analog synthesizers don't have that unpredictability of those vintage synthesizers. The Prophet 6, I'm pretty sure that the Prophet 6, the LFOs and the envelope generators are digitally generated. I'm pretty sure of that. And so they're very, very precise. The control is very, very precise. Even the oscillators, they are marketed as voltage controlled oscillators, but they're very, very precise in tune. They really are precise. They might as well be, to my ears, digitally controlled oscillators, or even digital oscillators. To be honest with you, they are so precise to me compared to sort of vintage synthesizers. And that's why, on the Dave Smith Instruments Prophet 6, we've got a slop amount control, and a control that sort of like has behind it a little computer algorithm that's going to be sort of like slightly intentionally pseudo-randomly changing within small tolerances the frequencies of the oscillators on each note hit within each voice, basically, to sort of give a little bit of unpredictability. And that's what a lot of synthesizers have these days, is these sort of like slop controls, and they're not the same as vintage analog. They are an emulation even inside an analog synth. So what I want to look at just very quickly is whether or not we have that kind of capability in the Quantum to give some unpredictability to the sound. Okay, so the way to achieve that sort of semi-pseudo randomness with the Quantum is using a parameter that's available for each of the oscillators, and I'll show you that now. What I'm going to do now is just basically just initialize a patch, and as you'll see we get the wavetable up here. I'm going to switch it to waveform. I'm going to add a second oscillator waveform as well, and make sure that both of those are up with maximum volume. And if I play a note, you'll hear there's just a very slight phasing going on, and a slight detune. And that's because with an initialized patch, if I go to the Control tab on any of the oscillators, there is a parameter here at the bottom called pitch var, or pitch variation is what it stands for. And by default, with an initialized patch at least, it's set to 0.17, 17%. I don't know if you're going to be able to see that on the screen or not, but it's set to 17%. If I whack it up all the way to maximum value, and then I play the same note over and over again, you should hopefully hear sort of varying amounts of detune. It's going to sound horrible because it's at maximum, but hopefully you'll hear it. There you go, so very little detune and then a load. So it's kind of choosing a sort of a pseudo-random amount of detune up to a maximum each time a note is pressed, or each time a voice is played. And that's exactly the same way that the slop amount parameter works on the Prophet synthesizers. Okay, so that's really all I wanted to cover in this particular video. Even so, it's ended up being quite a long one. I don't want this video, I hope it doesn't come across that I'm trying to sort of like create a competition here. Is this synthesizer as good as this synthesizer? It's really not about that. These synthesizers sound different. It takes an awful lot of effort to try and make them sound similar, and you can say the same about any synthesizer. Really all I was trying to get out of this video was to sort of like explore the Quantum's capabilities for giving a little bit of that kind of, you know, vintage analog feel. You know, the same way that modern analog synthesizers need to have specific controls and capabilities to sort of emulate those old synths, modern day digital and digital hybrid synthesizers also need to have those same capabilities. So that's really all I wanted to cover in this video. I really do hope it's been enjoyable or informative in some way. As always, thank you very much for watching.